Before I begin, I want to tell anyone who listens to this who would like to read this book that I have it on a Google document, and it's easy for me to send it to anyone who would desire to read it. All I need is to know your email address. So remember that. Chapter 2, The Laboratory. As I came around the corner onto West 67th Street, I could see Rosemary talking to the doorman of the apartment building where I had roomed with her for the past few months. I did a New York-style double park in front of them, and the doorman and Rosemary brought my luggage to the car. "I am going to miss you," Rosemary said as we placed the luggage in the trunk. "David and I are really going to miss you too," I said as I closed the trunk. "This city has served us well these past 7 years, but once we get settled in Virginia, we probably won't be eager to come back for a while, so you'll just have to come and visit us." "I'd love to come to Virginia," Rosemary remarked as we walked around to the side of the car. "In fact, I have a friend there whom I'd like to visit. He also moved from New York. Everyone's abandoning me." "Rosemary, don't make me feel guilty about leaving," I said as I hugged her. "You'll just have to release Manhattan and move to Virginia yourself." "Have I met your friend in Virginia?" "I don't think so," Rosemary replied, "but I know you and David would appreciate meeting him. His name is Robert Monroe. Most people call him Bob. He's a very unusual man. He has just remarried, but I haven't met his new wife, Nancy." "It would be great if we lived close to the Monroes, since we knew almost no one in Virginia," I said as I waved a driver around my illegally parked car. "In a town called Afron, Virginia, and I have no idea where it is," Rosemary replied. I opened the car door and pulled out the Virginia map. "We might as well hold up traffic a little longer," I chuckled as I spread out the map on the hood of the car. "Okay, let's see, where's Afron in relation to Bridgewater?" I muttered as I looked for the city listing. "Yes, here it is, 1 finger joint away. Wow, that's not far at all. Probably less than an hour's drive from Bridgewater." "Well, that settles it," Rosemary exclaimed. "I'll come." "I'll be there sooner or later," she said as I drove away. Through my rear-view mirror, I saw her waving as I turned off 67th Street onto Broadway and headed toward the Lincoln Tunnel. It would be my last drive out of Manhattan as a New Yorker. After a short time in the little town of Bridgewater, we moved to Oak Hill Farm in Mount Salone, an old rural community nestled next to the mountains. I had seen an ad for a frame house renting for $100 a month. Being used to New York City rents, I thought it had to be a misprint, or that there was perhaps no windows, electricity, or indoor plumbing. When David and I rounded a bend in the road and viewed Oak Hill Farm for the first time, we were astonished. There, sitting eloquently on a hill, was my picture of a lovely southern mansion, with 2-story pillars and a huge oak tree in front. Other beautiful trees surrounded the house, which was on 22 acres of gently rolling hills. The idyllic farmstead became ours for the next 7 years, and the rent never rose above $100. The house did, by the way, have windows, electricity, and running water, as well as thoughtful, attentive landlords. When our friends in New York City learned about our newfound treasure in the country, entertaining a steady stream of visitors became a major activity. One day the phone rang and a voice said, "Sooner is here. When can I come?" I was elated to hear Rosemary's voice. "Our guest room is yours whenever you arrive." "What about the weekend after next?" she asked. "I'm going to rent a car and drive down." I was thrilled. "I'll get directions to you in the mail today, Rosemary." "Great," she said. "And I'll call Bob and Nancy Monroe to see if we can visit them while I'm there." When I hung up, I realized that our absence of a social life had been almost as challenging as our environmental adjustments. Social contacts were very important to David and me, and our few months in Virginia hadn't given us enough time to develop a circle of friends. Actually, I was feeling a sense of loneliness and isolation. The thought of meeting some new friends with mutual interests was exciting. It was a crisp November day in 1971 when Rosemary, David, and I drove over Afron Mountain for the first time. When we arrived at the Monroe estate, Whistlefield Farm, we passed a prefab building and circled around a lake before arriving at the main house. As I stepped out of the car, the view was so breathtaking and awe-inspiring that I temporarily lost my sense of reality. A favorite scene in the deep reservoir of my fantasies is that of layers of mountains towering on the horizon. From the time I was a child growing up in the flat lands of central Ohio, I would transpose low-hanging clouds into an image of endless mountain ranges. Gazing upon such scenes always gave me a feeling of déjà vu, can't say that word, and here in real life were the mountains of my dreams. Goosebumps rose up on my neck as I sensed something very special about the energies of this setting. Was it a premonition that on this stage my future would be played out? As we moved up the walkway, Bob stepped out on the porch. He and Rosemary hugged each other warmly, obviously old friends. Then Rosemary turned to introductions. My first impression of Bob has always remained with me. He had a rare mystique that completely set him off from other people. In a casual, gentlemanly manner, he held the door, inviting us to come in and make ourselves at home. Bob's wrinkled attire presented a sharp contrast to his wife's stunning appearance as Nancy walked in from the kitchen to greet us. The two of them were always the odd couple, as far as dress was concerned. Nancy was the perfect Southern hostess, and dinner in their formal dining room was more than we had expected for our first social visit in Virginia. When we moved to the living room after dinner, Bob looked at Rosemary and commented that a book she was featured in was doing quite well since its publication earlier that year. David and I looked at the two of them in a quizzical manner, and Bob began to chuckle and relate the story of their first meeting. "Rosemary, wouldn't you agree," Bob asked, "that our meeting could probably be listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most unusual first meeting ever to take place?" "Absolutely, Bob, but I didn't plan to sit on your lap the first night you visited my apartment," Rosemary continued in mock irritation. "I simply forgot that that chair was assigned to you for the evening." "What a way to treat a first-time guest," Bob replied in a teasing manner. "However, it was good you sat on my invisible lap, Rosemary, because that made it much more evidential when I reported my out-of-body visit to your apartment. It actually turned out to be one of my most successful and humorous experiments. That's how you earned your own special niche in Journeys Out of the Body." Rosemary's face was aglow as she said, "You really blew me away, Bob, when you called later that night and described my apartment, the number of people in the group, where we were sitting and how we were dressed, as well as the fact that I mentioned working at a cancer hospital. And of course that I sat on you." Bob leaned over a coffee table and picked up a copy of what would someday be a classic in the field of out-of-body travel. He autographed the book and walked across the room, handing it to Rosemary. "Even though you may have already have a copy, I want you to have this one from me. You earned it. I want to thank you again for being willing to use your group and apartment for one of our out-of-body experiments. You were quite brave to offer, since I hadn't even met you when we set up the experiment." "Thank you, Bob. It was quite exciting to finally meet you in the body," Rosemary replied. "Your friendship has always meant a lot to me. When I read the report of the experiment and then learned that it went into your book, I was a little embarrassed that my posterior was put in print for posterity." Everyone laughed as Rosemary continued, "But I always meant to ask you, Bob, how did it feel when I sat on you?" Bob chuckled as he said, "Well, your action sure added a lot of weight to the experiment." David was captivated by the conversation and asked Bob when he first started going out of body. "I began to go out of body in the fall of 1958, Bob replied, "and I might add that no drugs or alcohol were used to precipitate the event." "Did you have many other happenings as exciting as the Rosemary event?" David asked. "My book is full of them," Bob continued, but the time I